Good afternoon. Welcome to the Iowa edition of our webinar series exploring state findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat 2040, Choosing an Abundant Future. I want to run through some quick logistics before we start in. You see that we have a question period toward the end of the webinar. If you would like to ask a question, you can do that by going to the control panel. And up on the control panel, you see an orange oblong box with a white arrow. That controls the control panel. You can either shrink it and pop it back out. When it's out, you will see that there's a questions tab in it. You see on the far right-hand side, there's a box with a little arrow. If you click on that box, that will bump the questions section out and allows you to ask a question or make a comment. And we would welcome any questions or comments again toward the end of the webinar. Also in that control panel, you see a handout section. Again, if you go to that little box on the right-hand side, you will be able to pop that out, and that will take you to the full report where you can read the whole report. It will also take you to the 2-page Iowa summary, and we'll be talking about that in just a minute. Couple more things. Don't worry about any background noises because everyone is muted. And we will be recording this webinar. We are recording it. So you will be sent a copy of the recording. Please feel free to forward that to anybody you think might be interested in what we're talking about today. So with that, let me get started and introduce myself and my co-host. I am Chris Coffin. I direct AFT's National Agricultural Land Network. This is a relatively new network intended for those who are on this call and others who are interested in saving the agricultural land base, whether that is through permanent protection of farm and ranch land, or through better planning and zoning, or all of the tools in the toolbox that we look to when we're thinking about retaining and protecting agricultural land in the U.S. I'll give a little bit more information about the network at the end. Joining me is Jean Brogish. Jean is Deputy Director for AFT's Midwest region. Jean is based in Central Illinois and works with farmers, landowners, and organizations throughout Illinois and the Midwest to encourage adoption of soil health practices and resilient farming communities. So thank you, Jean, for joining today. And before I turn it over to Jean, let me just say a few words about American Farmland Trust for those of you who are not familiar with us. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. Some know us best by our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker. But the bumper sticker before this one said, "It's not farmland without farmers." And I like that because it suggests that we understand agriculture and we take a holistic approach to agriculture. Our national initiatives, our regional programs focus not just on protecting the land base, but also on the practices used on the land and on the farmers and ranchers who steward the land, both the ones who are on there now and those who aspire to be on there in the future. Our programs and our research inform our state and federal policy advocacy and analysis. We are the only national agricultural land trust. We do direct land projects with farmers and landowners. We work from farm fields and kitchen tables to the halls of state capitals and Congress with 6 regional offices and a national office in Washington, D.C. And with that, let me now turn it over to, well, I was going to say we're going to turn it over to Jean, but we appear to have momentarily lost Jean. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. We'll hope that Jean can join us in a minute. But going on to the next slide then, let's talk about what is Farms Under Threat. Farms Under Threat is AFT's multi-year initiative to document the status of and threats to America's agricultural land base. We want to thank USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service for their partnership and financial support of this Farms Under Threat research. NRCS has been invaluable to this entire research project, as has our research partner, Conservation Science Partners. And for this report, we were also joined by the University of Wisconsin at Madison as a key collaborator. So we know that, what do we know? We know that we hope Jean is going to join us back in a minute. But let's keep going and dive into the methodology and findings from the report. And right now I am going to go off camera so that everybody can see the charts and the maps when we get there in a larger scale. The first two Farms Under Threat reports, Farms Under Threat State of America's Farmland, released in 2018, and Farms Under Threat State of the States, which we released in 2020, mapped past conversion of agricultural land, looking first from 1992 to 2012, and then from 2001 to 2016. In this report, we're looking forward. We're using past conversion data to model and predict future conversion of farm and ranch land out to 2040. We started with our Farms Under Threat State of the States data from 2001 to 2016. And as a reminder, or for those who didn't know, that analysis mapped conversion of land to two different types, urban and high density development and low density residential development. So let's look at the spectrum of what we mean when we talk about these two types. Here on the left, you see the examples of urban and high density development, those first four squares on the left-hand side. That's the traditional culprit in farmland conversion. So industrial, commercial, residential areas typically found in and around and on the outskirts of cities and towns. It does include some rural industrial sites, such as oil and gas infrastructure and solar development. Anything that can be identified by satellite remote sensing as built up. Low density residential development, which you see there examples on the right-hand side, has become a more pervasive culprit in farmland conversion. AFT worked with conservation science partners to pioneer an approach to map and quantify the impacts of this type of development on the agricultural land base. These areas range from, as you can see, these sort of lower density subdivisions to larger farmettes and ranchettes. This kind of scattered large lot housing fragments the agricultural land base and makes production much harder for the farms and ranches that remain. As you can see in these pictures, you can note that some agriculture can be found on things that we are calling low density residential land use. And some of these smaller farm parcels, especially those near urban centers, can be quite profitable and sustainable. However, our research has found that once land has been converted to low-density residential land use, it is far more likely to be further converted to urban high-density development. So, starting with this historical data, we projected into the future with the business as usual scenario. Basically, we made a straight line projection using the same annual conversion rate as what we documented from 2001 to 2016 to predict the level and the location of conversion by 2040. We adjusted the model to account for projected population growth or decline. Building off that scenario, we developed two alternative scenarios, which we'll get to in a minute. In each of the three scenarios, we also mapped the coastal flooding risk that is projected by sea level rise, obviously not much of an issue in Iowa. Once we had our projection of conversion and flooding risk, we quantified the effects of these scenarios in two different ways. First, on the agricultural land type. So is the conversion more likely to be on cropland or pasture land? And on the quality of the land that is likely to be converted. So looking at its productivity, versatility, and resiliency, which is an approach we took in the 2020 Farms Under Threat report. As with any modeling exercise, there are caveats. You see these here. Most importantly, we were not able to account for local zoning because it's inherently local and there is no national database to draw from. This means that our maps represent the general pattern and the rough amount of conversion that is likely based on those 2001 to 2016 conversion patterns. The maps do not reflect what may be allowed or prohibited on the ground through local land use regulations. Our modeling also does not include the impact of water scarcity and potential fallowing of land because of lack of water. This involves a complex interplay of variables, and mapping this was beyond the scope of this analysis. You'll see when we get to the website, though, that we did include a data overlay from World Resource Institute's Aqueduct, which offers some projections about water availability in the future. So here are the three scenarios that we modeled. First, business as usual, again, taking that 2001 to 2016 data, making a straight line projection out to 2040. The second is what we call runaway sprawl. This envisions a scenario where sprawl actually gets worse, driven by high housing costs in more urban areas and more remote work opportunities, which may only be improved as rural broadband expands. Some parts of the country may already be on this trajectory. And lastly, we modeled the future we hoped for, better built cities. This scenario envisions successful efforts to reduce the footprint of residential, commercial, and industrial development on productive ag land. While the scenario still results in the conversion of some agricultural land, it envisions a future with vibrant, compact cities and towns and abundant farm and ranch land to meet the needs of the future. So a quick look at the assumptions that went into the three scenarios. You see here the business as usual, what we talked about, this historical rate of conversion on both the urban and high density development and on that low density residential development. We adjusted for population growth only for the urban and high density conversion because we know there's a strong correlation between population growth and pressure on additional urban and high density development. For runaway sprawl, we kept that same rate of urban and high density conversion, but we expanded the rate of low density residential conversion. We did that because we know that this LDR conversion is what is fueling a lot of the conversion around the country these days. And conversely, for the better built cities, we lowered the rate of conversion from that historical rate. We dropped it by 25% based on evidence that cities and communities can get to a more compact development pattern fairly, I don't want to know that I want to say easily, but that it is possible to do. We took a more ambitious approach on reducing that rate of low density residential conversion to make it 50% lower, again, because there are fewer people involved. It seemed to us that that was an ambitious but achievable rate of reduction. So going on to the next chart, this shows each scenario's potential impact. The gray area shows that the conversion rate of 11 million acres that happened just in the first 15 years of this century alone. And in that 2001 to 2016, 114,000 acres in Iowa were converted. Under business as usual or worse, runaway sprawl, we could see another 18.4 to 24.4 million acres of farm and ranch land converted or threatened by conversion. Conversely, if we make smart choices about where and how we site future development, you see that we could reduce that footprint down to 11 million acres. So some of you may be thinking 11 million acres, that's still a lot. Is that really the best case scenario? From AFT's perspective, we appreciate the development, including renewable energy development, is necessary, and the need for affordable housing options is acute. So while it may be possible for cities and towns to be even more compact in their growth, and we hope that they can be, we chose what we believed was a realistic scenario. So these next two slides we hope are helpful in showing how Iowa compares to other states. This slide shows projected total acres converted by county. The darker the red or rust, the more acres that will be converted. And you see here that sort of line straight across the middle of Iowa, obviously going along interstate routes. The next slide compares the percent of agricultural land in each county that is projected to be developed. And here you see a slightly different pattern in Iowa and across the region. In Iowa, a couple of counties still light up because the projected conversion represents a sizable portion of their remaining farmland. So, another key finding relates to the impacts on our very best agricultural land. For previous reports, AFT created the first ever index of agricultural land quality that looked at the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of land, or what we called its PVR value. Land over a certain PVR threshold is what AFT considers to be nationally significant land. Land which is best suited for long-term cultivation and food production. Not being an Iowan, I'm always envious at the amount of high-quality farm ground you have in the state. Our PVR index shows 25.7 million acres of nationally significant land in the state, which represents about 83% of the state's farmland. What we find in our future projections is that conversion of this land is likely to be higher than conversion of all ag land generally, likely because for the same reason it's highly productive land, because it's flat, it's well drained, it's free of rocks, it is some of the least costly land to develop. The loss of this land is especially concerning. This is land that can produce the highest yields of crops and livestock with the least environmental impacts. Our modeling shows that nearly half of the projected conversion from 2016 to 2040 will occur on this land, even though it represents only 30% of the country's farmland. The more nationally significant land converted, the more reliant we become on marginal land for food production. And to put this potential loss of 9 million acres of nationally significant land nationally in perspective, the total acreage of land in the U.S. devoted to fruit and nut and vegetable production is just 10.4 million acres. Our projections show an estimated loss of about 145,000 acres of nationally significant land in Iowa, which is admittedly a very small percent of all such acres in the state. However, for farmers in counties where this conversion is occurring, there can be an impact on production and profitability as farmers offset the loss of that highly productive land with more marginal farm ground. Reliance on more marginal land can also have environmental impacts as well. And with that, I'm going to stop and see. I believe that we have Jean. She's been introduced. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jean now. I'm glad you're back.
I am too. Okay, you can hear me. I don't think you can see me. I've run many webinars and I've had other presenters' computer crash, but I've never been on the crashy side. So this is a new experience for me and I apologize for this. But I think Chris did mention I'm the Deputy Director for the Midwest region of American Farmland Trust. And I'll just a touch about me briefly before we dig into kind of the solar slides here is just that I do work primarily in Illinois and throughout the Midwest region, just working with farmers and landowners and communities to promote these soil health systems and resilient farms. And I'm really interested in the discussion today around Iowa, because agriculture is such an important industry in Iowa, generating 27% of the state's economy, and taking steps to ensure that prime productive agricultural land remains available for farming is near and dear to my heart. I did grow up in the southwest corner of Wisconsin and have some family in Iowa, so good connection there. And I think that was a little bit about me, so I'll catch up there, and then we can kind of look at the solar slides here that you have touched on, and I'm going to see if I can see those on my side, just so I know. Yeah, so these slides just kind of touch a little bit on one other piece of this whole study that considered how farmland loss or how large-scale solar development would impact farmland. And so the first slide here shows the projected acres of utility-scale solar photovoltaic projects, and these are large-scale, multiple solar panels across multiple fields here, and what this might look like by state for 2040. So the data comes from the decarbonization with electrification scenario of the U.S. Department of Energy Solar Futures Study, and it really just estimates that there will need to be about 7.4 million acres of utility scale solar in place by 2040 to meet some of the most recent energy goals and the Biden administration's goals for renewable energy. And the next slide here shows the percent of undeveloped land projected to be used for solar development. So this actually translates into what percent of agricultural land in Iowa, say, is needed. And there's more information about the solar modeling results in our solar technical paper that's available through Farmland Information Center. And there's also, AFT is also releasing a solar white paper later this year, because to be clear, American Farmland Trust is supportive of renewable energy development, but we do think it's important and essential that we plan carefully for it so that we are still maintaining that productive and versatile, resilient farmland. And there is some of the white paper actually discusses on how solar and agriculture may be able to coexist in mutually beneficial ways. And I think the last point on this slide here is to just kind of acknowledge that Iowa, they don't really show that, or the rates of conversion in Iowa are relatively low, but there is significant activity in neighboring states, and it's expected that those trends will continue. So it is something that may be more further on the horizon for Iowa, but definitely things to consider as we're thinking broadly about farmland protection and how our planning and land use decisions are affecting that. So I think, Chris, I'm pitching it back to you at this point, where we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the data for Iowa on the interactive website. And we'll go on a little bit of a journey here, and Beth Frazier, our colleague at AFT, will be our co-pilot navigator. So thank you, Beth, and Chris, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thank you so much. Jean, I'm glad you were back, and thank you, Beth, in advance for getting us through here. So we are now in the website, and Beth, when she has a minute, will put a link to this website in the chat. When you get here, here's what you see: the future of farmland. You see a summary basically saying all of what I just talked about, summary about what we found, and additional helpful information. To get out of here, you just click on this X right on the upper right-hand side. And while we're on the upper right-hand side, let's take a look at the minute at the 4 tabs that are in the upper right-hand corner of this website. You see the About one that takes you back to that summary document. Next to the About one is the How-To. That is a 5-minute video that talks about the various data layers that went into building the scenarios. Next to that is the View Report tab. This takes you to our Farmland Information Center, where you can again get to the full report, the executive summary, and then you see all these detailed things. So there's technical reports around, again, some of the data layers and what went into them. There's that solar technical report that Jean mentioned. And then you see the state of the states down there at the bottom. So if you want to go back and look at that actual conversion and more of that information there, you can find it. So that's that. And next to that is the Request Data tab. If you would like any additional data, you would like the spatial data layers, or you would like information at the county level, please feel free to fill this out, and it comes into us, and we will be back in touch, presumably with the information that you want. So with that, we are now going to zoom in to Iowa, and you just click on the state, and you will see that when you do that, that what comes up down below. And so we're going to take a few minutes to talk about this. On the left, you see the projected conversion statewide under the 3 scenarios, and it's broken into the dark red or rust, that is the urban and high density development, and on the right is the lighter orange, and that is the low density residential land use. And you see the numbers on the left, which are statewide, and the numbers on the right that are for Marshall County. And we just happen to be in Marshall County because that's where Beth's cursor was when she clicked on Iowa. But you can move your cursor around to come up with any of the county data. It's important to know that this is new in our Farms Under Threat research, because before now we have not been able to provide significant county level data, so that we hope that this becomes especially relevant for folks at the county level in thinking and doing comprehensive planning and land use planning and thinking about what the future of agriculture and farmland looks in each county. So let's go down a minute and talk about what else you can find on this cover page. Again, here back to this, what kind of land is likely to be converted. You see here that we are projecting under business as usual 109,000 acres of the upper half of land, the highest quality land in Iowa. We took those PVR values, found the median, and anything over the median is what we call Iowa's best agricultural land. And so here you see the projections of what might be lost of that kind of land at both the county level and the state level. Down below, you see how land will be impacted and what type of land, with cropland obviously the largest, the most threatened in terms of conversion, with some amount of pasture land at 40,000. And a note about this woodland and the almost 7,000 acres. This is not all forest land in the state of Iowa. This is woodland that is associated with a farm. And in 2020, we mapped woodland that was associated with a farm so that we could see what the impact would be, particularly on the viability of farms that have woodlots associated with them. So that's what this number relates to, is woodland that is specific to a farm. And down below here, you see what we were talking about earlier, that low density residential land use paves the way for further development. In Iowa, land that was in low density residential development in 2016 is 67 times more likely to be converted to high density development by 2040. So let's go back up and show you the downloadable state report on this blue tab that Beth is clicking. If you go to that, you find an easily downloadable, easily printed, easily digestible 2-page summary of these findings. We hope that we have made it easy for folks to share this kind of information with people who might and should be interested, whether that is policymakers, whether that's county officials, whether that is journalists and reporters, whether that's your members if you are with a membership organization. So again, here you see the projection of 183,900 acres of projected conversion, of which 79% is likely to occur on Iowa's nationally significant land, of course, because you have so much of it. But you see here that what we did is that we took that projection and we tried to translate it into what do we think the economic impact and the sort of broader impacts of this loss will be. And using the 2017 Census of Agriculture, we did some analysis, and it looks like it could result in the loss of 600 farms, 144 million in lost farm output, and the loss of 1,600 jobs associated with agriculture in the state. And then here, just quickly on the right, you see that we have put the 3 hardest hit counties, and Jean and Beth are going to talk about this in a minute, is Polk, Lynn, Dallas are the 3 ones that are hardest hit, and we can look at those further. With that, right now I will turn it back over to, you see at the bottom that there's a little bit more information. Again, it's information we've talked about. We hope you will find it useful. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jean, who with Beth's help are going to dive into some of these counties and look a little closer at some of the conversion.
Great, thanks, Chris. And can you just confirm you can hear me again?
Yep, absolutely. You're
okay.
Coming loud and clear.
Wonderful. Oh, wonderful. Okay, so we are going to just get familiar with some of the more features and settings of the platform, as Chris mentioned. And I think the first is to just Beth, maybe you can show the audience first the legend up in the upper right-hand corner there. This is helpful. You can see the gray colors represent existing residential areas with darker shade for urban or highly developed residential, and then the lighter gray for more of a low-density residential. And the red and orange there represent the projected development. They correspond with those bar charts down below that Chris just walked through, with the red, the darker red being more high-density residential areas. And we'll actually get those to appear on the map here in a minute. And just for reference, the remaining colors represent the landscape there. We have our roads, our water bodies, forests, and in Iowa, we see a whole lot of green. That's mostly the farmland there. So if you want to zoom in just another bit more there, Beth, and we can look at a couple different ways that we can actually look at the data. We're right now looking at the 2016 land cover data, but there is an option to view the satellite imagery. If you click on the button at the top there, it'll convert to a satellite view where you can actually see some of the more features on the landscape, and that's what I like to look at, and we'll use that as we focus on a few different areas from the state. And we're gonna build some scenarios. So I have the ability to choose a few different places to look at, and I grew up in the driftless area, as I mentioned, and I'm really curious to look at the area around Dubuque in eastern Iowa. So if we click on that, Dubuque County will highlight, and we can zoom in on it. And the chart at the bottom, as Chris pointed out, actually updates and provides summary data for Dubuque County on the right, and compares it to the state data on the left there. And we are going, and this shows all 3 different scenarios, but we actually are going to use the interactive mapping portion of this tool to compare them. So we have the ability to choose different scenarios. And so Beth, let's go ahead on the left. Let's pick that runaway sprawl using that drop-down button. We'll have runaway sprawl on the left. And then on the right, we'll choose better built cities. And this allows us to kind of contrast, again, that orange and red represent the projected development, and we can see the differences between these 2 scenarios. And if we zoom in closer around the city, I see there, you know, we can see increases in high density and low density development, more so on the left map than on the right map. But one thing that strikes me when I look at the differences between these two scenarios, you know, are some of those smaller towns just west of Dubuque, you know, kind of zooming in towards Dyersville to the west and Farley area there. These areas actually have higher rates of low density development under the runaway sprawl. And you can see that right there with the view that Beth pulled up. We can see, you know, some additional farmland areas being taken with low density development there. And with that zoomed in view, actually, you can also use the slider in the upper right-hand corner. This is one more kind of tool that you can all explore and play with on your own. You can adjust the transparency of that data layer to see kind of what's underneath by simply sliding it back and forth, and it'll give you a better view of the potential fields and potential farms that are affected. But it's really, really important, you know, this tool isn't predicting which exact parcels will be developed. It's more just identifying some trends. And my point in kind of drilling into this area is just showing that the trend of these smaller towns near some of the more urban or larger cities, they tend to be sprawling more. And this aligns with what I've seen in this area, you know, and so it's really important to think about the fact that smaller towns often don't have the infrastructure to support sprawling populations in terms of schools and grocery stores and volunteer fire departments. So as we think about planning and the importance of planning, again, engaging with leaders in some of those more rural communities is as important as engaging with leaders in some of the more larger population centers. And we'll see that again here. I have another, let's look at another area that the report listed Dallas and Polk counties as being two of the three most vulnerable areas, and those are both around Des Moines, Iowa. So if we just zoom in around Des Moines and look at that area, and we'll see again here the difference between the left-hand map and the right-hand map, more orange and red on the left-hand map, indicating greater levels of development under the runaway sprawl compared to the scenario using the better built cities. And if we, yeah, it looks like you're zoomed in on Dallas County there. If we look closely at the northern part of that county, zoom in there, yeah, thank you. You'll see again that the growth projected around towns like Dawson and Woodward, and this is similar to the trends we saw in Dubuque and Dubuque County, and I think it's similar to some of the trends if you compare other counties when you get an opportunity to use this tool yourself. You'll see the difference there. And again, just a reminder that Dallas was one of the top three counties, as well as the adjacent Polk County there, which includes more the center of Des Moines. And I think we still have time. I think for fun, we'll just choose one more area, and I chose Ottumwa, which is home to my second favorite MASH character, Corporal Radar O'Reilly. So if we can zoom in on Ottumwa there, and it isn't that big of a city compared to Des Moines or even Dubuque, of course, but you can still see significant differences throughout the county, as well as differences when you look at that tri-county area there, you know. So just thinking, again, you would probably consider this more of a rural area of Iowa, but you can see noticeable differences from Monroe County just west of Ottumwa to Jefferson County on the east in terms of what that development projection looks like under the runaway sprawl scenario and the better built city scenario. So underscoring one last time, you know, it's not necessarily an urban concern. Our land use planning decisions really affect those rural areas as well. I think the last feature that would be helpful from a user perspective is there's one more view. We looked at the 2016 land cover and we're looking at satellite, but there's also a standard view button. And this just simplifies the map and creates a very kind of basic high-level contrast for the data. So that might be helpful if you're printing out a map and just really showing kind of the comparison between the two scenarios, and encourage all of you to explore these different features and look at your own hometowns and try out, take your own cruise around Iowa. And so thank you, Beth, for helping me, flying a little blind here with my computer challenges, but appreciate your help navigating with us, and I'll turn it back to Chris.
Great, thank you, Jean. You did an incredible job given that you were just by phone, so appreciate that, and thank you, Beth. So now that we've talked about the findings, we want to take a few minutes to talk about action. What can each of us do to help choose an abundant future? The report has policy recommendations in each of these 4 categories and at every level of government. So if you are a county or a municipal official, a state legislator, a state agency employee, a congressional staffer, we hope you can find a recommendation in here that you would like to champion. Please let us know if we can provide you with any additional information about any of the policy ideas in the report. If you were a farmer, a landowner, a community advocate, you work for a conservation or a farm or a smart growth organization, or you're a community planner, we encourage you to share and discuss these recommendations with your elected and agency representatives and partners. So let me highlight just a few things that are in each of these buckets of recommendations. In encouraging smart growth, we know that foundational to smart growth and compact development is good local planning, as Jean mentioned. Comprehensive or master or general plans can provide the vision and roadmap for land use regulations that promote compact development and minimize development of a community's best farmland. We encourage communities to have comprehensive plans, and we encourage folks listening to get involved in their county or city's comp or master plan development and review process. We also encourage states to support local comprehensive planning efforts and to have a statewide plan for agricultural land retention and protection. Protecting agricultural land. Congress will be writing a new farm bill next year. An important program in that bill is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, which helps to fund the purchase of agricultural conservation easements from willing farmers and landowners. More funding for that program would help protect more farmland in Iowa. We were excited to see an additional $1.4 billion in this program in the Inflation Reduction Act passed by the Senate last weekend. If this legislation is enacted, it will mean even more opportunity for farmers and landowners to sell an easement. Under advancing smart solar siting, state and local governments can incentivize solar development on existing infrastructure and on marginal land, as well as incentivize agrivoltaics or dual-use solar development. If solar is located on productive agricultural land, local governments should ensure that solar development adheres to best practices for the construction, for the operation, and for the decommissioning, all to ensure that soil health is preserved, water resources are protected, and farmers still have the ability to farm the land during and after the life of the project. And lastly, support farmland access. We know that there will need to be a next generation of farmers in Iowa as everywhere else. State and local governments can help support programs that are working with older farmers and landowners who are looking for a farm successor. They can also support groups that are working with farm seekers in identifying and assessing land access opportunities. A lot of this work involves sustained assistance and making connections between and among farmers and landowners. This technical assistance can be extremely valuable in keeping farmland in farming. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Jean to talk a little bit more about planning for agriculture.
Thanks, Chris. You know, as you can tell, I have a special interest for rural in rural communities and protecting that farmland, and community planning is critically important for this smart growth. And so planning for agriculture. AFT encourages communities to be proactive and incorporate agriculture in their plans. And really this involves 4 basic principles, which are shown on the slide here. Just, inventory of the resource, understanding the value of farmland and open space to begin with, engaging farmers and ranchers in that planning process, incorporating agriculture into community plans and being very deliberate about where agriculture is and where we want it to maintain and be in the future, as well as implementing tools to retain and protect agricultural land. And these principles work in tandem with efforts to plan for smarter, more compact development. And there's a number of resources on planning for agriculture on our Farmland Information Center website. Hope that you'll check them out. And I also just want to touch on one other thing that underscores the value of planning for agriculture, and that's really illustrated by the image on this slide, which summarizes the cost of community services. And so just looking at that chart, it compares the cost of providing services to business, agricultural, and residential sectors, and compares that with the amount of revenue generated through taxes by those same sectors. So for each dollar generated by business, a community spends about 30 cents in services. Each dollar, the middle chunk there is agriculture, and each dollar generated through taxes on agricultural lands, the community spends 37 cents. And so these 2 land uses are actually putting money into the savings account. They're putting more in than they're taking out. And if you contrast that with residential, which contributes $1 and takes out $1.16, so it actually costs more than it generates. And it's really, again, just important for county and township level leaders to be mindful of this and proactive in planning for agriculture. It is not only important for the viability of farms that we're maintaining farmland, but it's the viability of some of these rural communities that we're also maintaining farmland. So I think the next stop on this journey is any questions that we might have from the audience.
Great, thank you, Jean. And I will remind people, particularly for those who might have come on late, that the way to ask a question or to make a comment is to go to the questions tab on that control panel. And again, if you go to the far right, there's a box with an arrow. Feel free to click on that. That pops that questions section out. So if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and put them in. And while we are waiting, Jean, to see if there are questions, I thought I would ask, obviously you can see that farmland conversion in Iowa is, it's becoming more of a smaller city, large town problem. It's not just limited to the major cities in Iowa. And thinking about that, are there specific initiatives in Iowa that are working on the protection of farmland? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. There are a couple land trusts working in Iowa that are working, for the protection and preservation of farmland. There is the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation and the Sustainable Iowa Land Trust. There may be others that I'm not familiar with, and just welcome people to maybe contribute that information via the question function, and we can capture that. But there's other groups too that AFT has worked with and that I'm familiar with that are really supporting more broadly the concept of viable farms and soil health and land stewardship, including Practical Farmers of Iowa, Iowa Farm Bureau, the Iowa Department of Land Stewardship, and there's also a group that I've enjoyed working with is the Women in Ag group based out of Iowa there. And so, all of the groups are looking at that land stewardship piece, that farm viability piece, and there's definitely an opportunity to build off of that and look more closely at converting that energy and commitment more and directing it more maybe towards specific farmland protection. And I guess, Chris, this is maybe a question back to you. I'm not sure if you mentioned it while I was trying to get back into the webinar about PACE programs, the purchase of ag conservation easements. I know that AFT has developed some tools for that, and that's not really active in Iowa. But if anyone, hoping maybe you can explain a little bit about PACE programs, and if anyone interested is on this call is interested in learning more, where can they go to get information on that?
Well, that's a good question too, and thanks for asking it, Jean. So one of the ways, the reason why American Farmland Trust is keen on purchased easements is that it is giving farmers and landowners an option, right? An option when sometimes, life circumstances, particularly for many farmers and landowners who are land rich and cash poor, have limited opportunities if they are looking to either expand their farm, to reinvest in the farm, to retire, or to pay for any number of family needs. And so rather than be faced with only the choice of having to sell land, either if it has to be sold, ideally sold to another farmer, but in those cases where you might have developers being willing to pay a higher price, it's nice for farmers and landowners to have an option. And that's why we think that having the option of selling an agricultural conservation easement is something that we want to see made more widely available in more places around the country. It doesn't work everywhere. There needs to be places where there's some amount of development pressure, because otherwise there's not that kind of value in the easement. But there certainly are places, as we can see in what this report shows, that there is that conversion pressure. And so there's sort of two ways on the purchased easement fronts. Is land trust can work directly with a landowner through this federal program, the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. There's also value to doing a donated easement, because there are certain tax benefits, and any of the land trusts working in Iowa can help folks think about that. But in terms of programs, there are in places around the country quite a number of county-based programs, and that is something that we really hope that communities will begin to think about. We are going to be doing some webinars for county officials who are interested in understanding why they might think about creating a county program and what might be the first steps that one undertakes. So if anybody is hearing this and is interested in learning more, please be in touch, and Beth can put my email address in the chat, because we would happily share more information. And then I guess, Jean, this sort of gets to the two boxes that you see here. The Farmland Information Center is a clearinghouse of information for both landowners. So if a landowner is interested in the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, they can go to the Farmland Information Center and find a huge number of resources. There's also a lot of resources for county officials, both around planning and around how one might create a county PACE program. So they have an answering service, which is why you see a phone number here. So if folks would rather pick up the phone and call someone, they can do that. And again, up here, the National Agricultural Land Network, which is what I direct, is another vehicle for folks who are interested in learning more and becoming part of a national community of folks who can learn from each other. We have a lot of programming planned for the following year, and that you can see that farmland.org, NALN, is a way to be in touch. If you want to join, it's free. Did I say that? And we hope that people will join. And with that, Jean, I think, hang on, I'm just checking to see, we do have a couple of questions here. So this is a comment. Well, no, maybe there's two. So I'm just going to read this out loud. We have a family farm in Iowa that we are wanting to expand. We keep running into problems acquiring farmland because we run into cities purchasing that land and pricing us out for sewage disposal. We are in an Iowa county. So I think that was one comment, and here's a question. What about using a farm trust program to maybe do a reverse mortgage for an aging farmer? And another family that wants to acquire could reverse purchase to allow that farmer to stay and farm, or sell and stay through this mechanism. That's an interesting comment. We actually did a little bit of work a couple of years ago on the reverse mortgage concept. There was some interest in that amongst folks at USDA. So I'm glad that the listener raises this, and it's a good reminder that we need to collectively keep thinking about additional tools that could be used to help facilitate farm transfers. Jean, I don't know if you've have any thoughts on reverse mortgages in particular, or have any other thoughts that would be relevant to this question and comment?
Yeah, no real specific thoughts on reverse mortgage other than I agree with you. You know, it seems like an innovative tool. I do sympathize with farmers trying to expand farmland and being outbid by whether it's a city or whether it's a developer or whether it's some other kind of speculator on land values. I've heard many stories and challenges around that topic. And it is something that I think AFT and many groups are looking at, is just kind of that transition planning, but also kind of transition tools, and how do we make land affordable for existing farmers as well as new farmers as well. Land consolidation is a real challenge on the landscape. And one other thing that I know is relevant in Iowa as well is just kind of that non-operating landowner and the large amount of rented land. And so that kind of feeds into, if we can make that land accessible and transfer it and get it in the ownership of farmers, we know that there is a greater chance that that land will be managed with soil health practices that make the farm more resilient and more profitable and better for environment and communities as well. So there's a lot of opportunities around land access and farmland protection in the Midwest.
Great, thank you, Jean. I don't see any other comments or questions. So I think we should probably, and looking at what time it is, that seems perfect that we wrap up. And so I just want to say thank you to everybody. I hope you will make use of the Farmland Information Center as a source of information, both for the farmers and landowners you work with and for yourselves as you are exploring some of the ideas that we talked about here and continue to do your work. And again, the network, I hope you will consider joining, because a network is only as good as the people who are in it. And so we need voices from around the country, both those who are experienced in some things and those who are experienced in others. So we would welcome your participation in that. And with that, let me hand it off to you, Jean, for a final wrap up. And I'm just going to say is that we have a wonderful Midwest office and a Midwest team, of which Jean is an integral part of it. And they are also a wealth of information. So I hope that you all will use Jean and the rest of the team as a resource as well. And with that, Jean, let me turn it to you for the final word.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And I'll just mention, if anyone is interested in contacting me, my email is jbrokish, so JBROKISH @farmland.org, and I'd be happy to connect with them, see if there's opportunities to work together. And just thank Chris and Beth here for letting me be part of this adventure, and thank everyone for joining us today.
Great, thank you all.